It's time to discuss the worst career decisions made by UFC fighters. There are a time in UFC fighters' careers where they have a decision to rather take a fight on short notice, to go to a different weight class, or just maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a gym they train at. And these decisions made by these fighters, in my opinion, are 10 of the worst decisions we've ever seen. And in my opinion, it changed the trajectory of their careers. And some of these decisions led to their downfall. So I'm going to go over 10 examples today of these decisions, and in no particular order, starting off with Alexander Volkanovski taking on Islam Makhachev in the rematch on 11 days notice. Now, to me, this was a terrible decision made by Volkanovski. If you guys don't remember, Volkanovski came up short against Makhachev in their fight at UFC 284, a razor close decision that could have went either way. It went to Makhachev, right? So then Volkanovski ended up getting surgery, right? After beating Yair Rodriguez, he got surgery on his arm. He was fat, out of camp. Well, Charles Oliveira was set to fight Islam Makhachev in a rematch where Charles Oliveira, like 2 weeks out of the fight, pulls out because he had an injury to his eye. He had to pull out of the Makhachev rematch. So who do they call? None other than Alexander Volkanovski, who, hard-headed, stubborn Volk, took the fight on 11 days notice, fat, out of shape, coming off of surgery. Terrible idea for Volkanovski. Listen, I love Volkanovski. He's one of the greatest fighters to ever exist, but there was no way in hell he was going to beat Islam Makhachev on 11 days notice. And in the fight, it proved that it was too much for him because he ended up getting head kicked in the first round, knocked out cold. And what's terrible about this is he took another fight against Ilia Topuria 4 months later and was subsequently KO'd again, which I don't really think the Makhachev fight had any effect on him taking the Topuria fight, because I think if Topuria landed that shot, it would have KO'd any version of Volk. But man, him taking the Islam Makhachev fight on 11 days notice instead of like properly preparing for the rematch, in my opinion, was a terrible decision by Volk. His team should have stopped him. This tarnished his legacy a bit. I mean, to be honest, not too many people hold this loss in high regard, being that, you know, it was on 11 days notice. But at the end of the day, a loss is a loss, man. And you go from being the pound for pound number one to getting beat and then head kick, knocked out in the rematch, and then knocked out again by Topuria 2 fights later. So yes, in my opinion, Volkanovski taking the Islam Makhachev fight on 11 days notice was in fact the worst decision he's made of his entire career. And yeah, man, I hope Volk returns in the full form this weekend. I am picking Diego Lopez against him, but we will see. Tony Ferguson cutting to 155 pounds 2 times for no reason. If you guys do not remember, at UFC 249 2019, Tony Ferguson was slated to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? Khabib ends up having to pull out, right? Tony stays on the card. They call none other than Justin Gaethje to step up on short notice. Well, I believe the fight card was moved a couple weeks forward due to the pullout. But either way, Tony Ferguson made weight on the original date he was supposed to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. And then 2 weeks later, he makes 155 again to fight Justin Gaethje, just to prove he can make weight twice and that he's a true professional. Well, in my opinion, this backfired, and Tony Ferguson, in the fight, if you look at his face, that's his face at the bottom after fighting Justin Gaethje. One of the worst beatdowns we've ever seen. And a lot of people will say, well, Tony was old, you know, he was past his prime at that point, 36 years old. And while I do agree to an extent that he was getting older and he had taken a lot of damage and eventually it was going to catch up to him, and you know, but in my opinion, if he wouldn't have cut that weight twice and he just cut once, because Tony Ferguson's a big lightweight, right? This guy was weighing over 180 pounds in the cage. If he would have only cut that weight one time and then fought Justin Gaethje with one weight cut, he might have had a lot better chance to win, and he definitely wouldn't have taken all that damage, you know? Who's to say that Tony Ferguson is more rejuvenated only cutting weight one time going into that Gaethje fight, and he ekes out a decision, or he loses a close decision? And I genuinely think the beatdown that Tony got by Justin Gaethje is a huge reason on why he went on an 8-fight losing streak and got finished a bunch, because that type of damage taken in that fight is life-changing damage. Like, if you take that damage, you're never going to be the same again. So yes, a lot of people forget that Tony did in fact cut weight twice leading up to his fight with Justin Gaethje 2 times in 1 month, and I 100% think that this ultimately led to him getting destroyed by Gaethje and then led to his downfall. Not to say he would have beat Gaethje, but I don't think he would have got his beaten as bad as he did. But nonetheless, Tony Ferguson, you know, made another career mistake he made was not retiring sooner. This guy went on an 8-fight losing streak, and he still wants to fight in the GFL. So I feel for Tony, man, because this is all these fighters have. So they go and go and go. And the next fighter on this list, TJ Dillashaw. Actually, there's two things I want to talk about, but I think the biggest mistake TJ Dillashaw did was fighting Aljamain Sterling with one working arm. In what world, what kind of egomaniac is TJ Dillashaw to think he could have came into a fight with Aljamain Sterling, the best grappler at bantamweight at the time, and beat him with one arm? If you guys do not remember, TJ Dillashaw was given a title shot against Aljamain Sterling, and he's always kind of had shoulder problems, right? Well, in the fight, he warned the referee backstage that, hey, man, my shoulder's been popping in and out of socket my entire camp. It's going to happen in the fight. Please don't stop the fight if it happens. Pretty much saying, hey, man, I have one arm. Let me fight until I can't anymore. Which TJ is a scumbag for this, because think about all the people that betted on him not knowing he had that injury. All those people put bets on a guy that wasn't fully healthy. And this is the worst mistake of TJ Dillashaw's career, in my opinion, because if you guys know anything about TJ post-fighting career, he can't even lift his arm above his head, one of his shoulders, because he fought with an injured arm for so long and just kept postponing surgeries on it so long that now it's permanently damaged and he doesn't know if it'll ever be fixed again. So I definitely think he regrets fighting Aljo with one arm. Another career mistake for TJ Dillashaw was going down to flyweight. This literally was his demise. He got knocked out by Henry Cejudo because he was a skeleton of himself. He had to take EPO to make the weight because he couldn't do it on his own. So yeah, that was a horrible career decision. TJ Dillashaw, obviously not the sharpest tool in the box. This guy made a couple terrible decisions in his career, and he paid for it, man. And now this guy is retired and he can't even lift his arm above his head, and he is very salty about having to end his career due to his injury. But hey, man, should have took care of your body more, buddy. Henry Cejudo retiring in the middle of his prime. Yeah, this was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. If you guys don't know, Henry Cejudo in 2020, after defeating Dominic Cruz by knockout, he decided as the double champion, as a flyweight champion, bantamweight champion, at the height of his career, because quote-unquote he wasn't getting paid enough, that he was going to retire. And I think he didn't really want to retire. This was more so him leveraging himself, his star power, thinking he was worth more than he really was. He was like, you know what? I'm done with this UFC stuff. He was with a new woman at the time. I think he had just had a daughter. And, you know, he was looking to better himself. But I don't think Henry Cejudo ever truly wanted to retire. He wanted to get paid more, and the UFC weren't budging. So he's like, you know what? I'll pull the retirement card, and maybe they'll offer me more money. Well, the reason I call this a mistake, if he would have stayed retired, I'd have been like, good for Henry Cejudo. You know, this guy's double champion. He retired on top. He did it right. But the reason that it's his worst career mistake is this guy came back at 36 years old to face, or 37, to face Merab Dvalishvili, and he got destroyed by Merab, right? Or no, he came back to face Aljo for the belt, right? Aljo beat him up, pieced him up, won a pretty comfortable decision, right? Then he comes back against Merab Dvalishvili, gets absolutely dominated. Then he comes back against Song Yadong, was getting pieced up before the eye poke, and then ultimately lost the fight due to Song Yadong eye poke by technical decision. So in my opinion, Henry Cejudo coming back was a terrible decision. First of all, coming back at 36 years old at bantamweight is a terrible idea in the first place. And not to mention, he also came back and now has lost 3 fights, which in my opinion does tarnish his legacy a bit. You know, the whole triple C, Olympic champion, double champion. Well, now he has 3 losses at the end of his career, and it doesn't look great. If he'd have just retired on top after beating Dominic Cruz, his legacy would have been a lot more intact. But hey, man, the money talks, and I guess Henry Cejudo was getting low in that dough, so he had to give Uncle Dana a call, and it looks like it came back to bite him, because he said he wants to do one more fight. I don't think he should. I think he should just hang it up. But especially since now he's clarified that since the Song Yadong fight, he's been seeing double for like a month now. That's extremely worrying for his eyesight, as he's not a young guy anymore, you know. But nonetheless, Henry Cejudo made quite the ridiculous decision to retire in the middle of his prime. Michael Bisping, a lot of people don't know this. Baby boy! Michael Bisping, you know, one of the best commentators right now. But either way, Michael Bisping, after losing to Georges St-Pierre back at UFC 217, decided it was a good idea to take a fight 2 weeks later after getting knocked down and choked out by Georges St-Pierre, losing brain cells. I don't know how the commission approves him to fight. 2 weeks later, was sanctioned to fight against Kelvin Gastelum in the main event of UFC China, Shanghai, after Anderson Silva pulled out with the injury. It was supposed to be Gastelum Silva. Michael Bisping steps up on 2 weeks' notice, and what could go wrong? Well, I tell you what could go wrong. He got knocked out cold by Kelvin Gastelum in the first round, and yeah, this was obviously a terrible decision by Michael Bisping. Listen, I know you're a tough guy. You had one eye half your career, you know. But let's be real, man. Taking a fight against a young, up-and-coming, dangerous Kelvin Gastelum on 2 weeks' notice after you just came out of a war and got knocked down and choked out by GSP was got to be a terrible decision for your career. And Michael Bisping actually ended his career on this fight. He never came back he said he wanted to come back and get another fight, but unfortunately the sour end to his career, the last memory we had of Michael Bisping was getting KO'd by Kelvin Gastelum. And yeah, man, don't take fights on 2 weeks notice after you just fought. I mean, I could understand if Michael Bisping just went in there and like steamrolled GSP, you know, and he was at the top and he's like, you know what? I'm going to defend my title 2 weeks later in China to become a badass. But even then, that'd have been a terrible career decision. But nonetheless, a lot of people don't know that Bisping got knocked out by Kelvin Gastelum after he took the fight on 2 weeks notice. And yeah, man, in my opinion, this was Michael Bisping's downfall as he literally retired after this fight. Rose Namajunas switching her head coach from Whitman to Pat Barry. So for a long time, Rose Namajunas was coached by head coach Trevor Whitman, along with Kamaru Usman and Justin Gaethje. Those guys reformed their striking with Trevor Whitman. Rose Namajunas ended up being one of the best strikers to ever fight in the strawweight division. She actually holds knockout wins over Zhang Weili and over over Joanna Jędrzejczyk, two of the strawweight greats. Rose Namajunas knocked out and beat Zhang Weili by decision. She also knocked out and beat Joanna Jędrzejczyk by decision. And she also beat Jessica Andrade in a rematch by decision. Rose Namajunas had some amazing wins at strawweight. Well, in the second Carla Esparza fight, which went down as one of the most boring fights in UFC history, that was the first time she was coached by Pat Barry instead of Trevor Whitman. And it shows, man. Pat Barry is a terrible coach. First of all, he's been grooming Rose Namajunas since she was 14 years old, brainwashing her. And he brainwashed her so hard, he made her believe that her performance against Carla Esparza was a good performance and that she didn't do anything wrong in the fight. If that is not peak delusion by a coach, I don't know what is. Rose Namajunas, her downfall needs to be studied, but not really. We all know what it's because. It's because Pat, the groomer, Barry, took over her career, brainwashed her, and he's a terrible coach. He was never a good fighter himself. And yeah, man, Rose Namajunas, if she wants to repair her career, needs to immediately go back to Trevor Whitman, because since switching to Pat Barry, she's dropped a decision to Carla Esparza, which is embarrassing. She just dropped a decision to Erin Blanchfield. She got pieced up by Manon Fiorot, and she just looked flat in all of those fights. It wasn't the same like good striking-esque Rose Namajunas that we've seen in past times. So a lot of people say she's past her prime, but I just think it's terrible coaching by Pat Barry. So in my opinion, Rose switching to her head coaching status to her fiance instead of Trevor Whitman was a terrible idea. Kamaru Usman, this is actually actively happening right now. Kamaru Usman wasting the end of his prime not fighting. I think this is one of the worst decisions made by any fighter. If you guys do not remember, first of all, let me just clarify. I made a video on this recently. Kamaru Usman has not had a win since November of 2021. That is a crazy stat. If you think about it, this guy's still ranked number 4 at welterweight, but I think him sitting out and not fighting in the last year and a half is a terrible decision. I mean, this guy's about to be 38 years old in May. He hasn't fought since October of 2023. Whenever he dropped a close decision to Khamzat Chimaev. He got dominated in the first round, but came back to win the second and third, in my opinion. That fight should have been a draw, but we have not seen Kamaru Usman since, and he hasn't said he's been injured. And as we know, Kamaru Usman has horrible knees, right? And your bad knees do not get better with age. They get worse. And as Kamaru Usman is edging his way towards 38 years old, hasn't fought in a year and a half, on a 3-fight losing streak, I think that he just wasted the end of his prime by not fighting. And this is the worst decision of his entire career. Now, if he doesn't come back and he decides to just hang it up without coming back, you know what? I'll say kudos to Kamaru Usman. He had an amazing run, and he just decided to go out, not coming back, didn't want to take any more brain damage. But I genuinely think Kamaru Usman has a plan to come back. He's mentioned multiple times that whenever he comes back, he's going to be in the running for the title. So I think whenever he comes back, we're going to see a washed Kamaru Usman, and the age is going to show, the bad knees are going to show, and the time off is going to show. And I think that, yeah, man, he should have struck while the iron was still hot, while he was still closer to his fighting prime. Because let's be real, Kamaru Usman at 38 years old, a year and a half out of the cage, even if he was to sign a fight right now, it would still be 3-4 more months before he fought. So yeah, I think he wasted the end of his prime, and it wasn't the best career decision by Kamaru Usman, and now he's getting scolded by the fans for being what we call a rank squatter. Ronda Rousey abandoning her grappling for striking. This was one of the most terrible career decisions. Ronda Rousey, if you guys don't know, was 12-0 at one point with 6 title defenses in the UFC. Every single win she had was either by knockout or by armbar. Well, after a couple knockout wins against Alexis Davis and Bethe Correia, Ronda Rousey decided she was the Mike Tyson of the women's bantamweight division and decided, you know what? I can start beating up the men. I can beat up anybody. my grappling and my striking's some of the best in the world. So I'm going to completely abandon my grappling and I'm going to become a striker full time. And boy, did this come back to bite her in the ass, because in the fight versus Holly Holm, she completely abandoned her striking, went to strike with Holly Holm and ended up getting head kick knocked out. And then, so she got embarrassed in front of the world, right? After talking so much smack to Holly Holm, abandoning her grappling, got knocked out. A year later, she returns and gets Amanda Nunes. Once again, doesn't even try to grapple, tries to strike with Amanda Nunes, gets destroyed in 48 seconds, and never fights again. And still to this day, copes about those losses. I think Ronda Rousey is the perfect example of a grappler that fell in love with her striking, and it came back to bite him in the ass. Listen, don't ever forget where you come from. If you're going, like, there's nothing wrong with entertaining the striking a little bit, but I definitely think that Ronda Rousey, when fighting Amanda Nunes, should have looked to create a scramble right away. She was never going to outstrike Amanda Nunes or pose any danger on her on the feet. Amanda Nunes has a great chin, and she's way more powerful and dangerous than Ronda Rousey. So, yeah, I think Ronda Rousey, going from arm bars to trying to be prime Mike Tyson, was a terrible career decision, and she paid for it by 2 knockout losses and ending her UFC career. And she attributes that to concussions and bad weight cuts, but I just think that she just went away from why she was great in the first place. And plus, I mean, the skill level was going up, you know. She was fighting better competition, but I also think her not engaging in grappling against Holly Holm or Amanda Nunes was a terrible decision. And yeah, like I said, she paid for it with the rest of her career. Conor McGregor taking on Floyd Mayweather. Now, when I say this was a terrible career decision, I don't mean financially. I mean for his UFC career, because let's be real, Conor McGregor post Floyd Mayweather fight was never the same UFC fighter. Conor McGregor in 2017 got a massive mega fight with Floyd Mayweather, $100 million fight, the biggest fight in combat sports history, arguably 4.4 million pay-per-views sold, one of the biggest fights. Floyd Mayweather giving Conor McGregor his first professional boxing bout. It was huge. McGregor got paid a bag, right? And then he comes back to fight Khabib in the UFC. He gets choked out, right? Whatever. After getting choked out by Khabib, right, he comes back, I think a year and a half later to fight Donald Cerrone, right? Gets a first round finish over Donald Cerrone. Then comes back to face Dustin Poirier and gets knocked out in the fight. And then in the second fight, he breaks his leg, and then that's it. I genuinely think if Conor McGregor wouldn't have got that massive Floyd Mayweather fight and he would have just stayed in the UFC, I think he would have been more motivated. I think he would have been able to refine his skills and keep his karate-like fight style, right? Because that's what Conor McGregor was always successful with, the karate, bladed stance, moving in and out, great movement. Well, after the Mayweather fight, not only was he less motivated, he also changed his style to a more boxing-heavy style. And I genuinely believe that that style was his downfall. It just didn't work towards the latter half of his career. And yeah, man, also more money from the Mayweather fight caused him to spiral into drug addiction and partying all the time. And if you've seen Conor McGregor in recent times, you know that it's not the same McGregor. It is quite a different Conor McGregor. It's sad to see that this guy's racking up court cases, public court cases, and all kind of crazy stuff he's been through in the last 6-7 years. Because listen, man, drugs aren't going to get you in the top of your mental state. They're going to make you deteriorate in front of your fans' eyes. And that's what we're seeing with Conor McGregor. He's just not the same guy. It's a sad downfall. And yeah, I think that him taking that Mayweather fight, although financially great for generations to come for his family, mentally right for him and his career, he could have made millions in the UFC. He was by far the biggest UFC star. He would have racked up a good amount of money in the UFC, but he wanted the generational wealth. He got it, and I think he paid for it in terms of his lifestyle. So Jake Paul boxing UFC fighters. I said that backwards. UFC fighters choosing to box Jake Paul. I think that this is a terrible decision, specifically Ben Askren and Tyron Woodley. So Ben Askren became the laughingstock of the UFC, but whenever he got knocked out in 5 seconds by Jorge Masvidal, and Ben Askren was like, you know what? I'm retired from the UFC. What could be a good career decision for me? Oh, that's right. Let me fight Jake Paul whenever I have some of the worst striking that the UFC's ever seen. Let me fight Jake Paul in a boxing match. And it's funny because Dana White was actually sold that Jake Paul would lose to Ben Askren. But Jake Paul ended up knocking him out in the first round. And yeah, it did not look good. Also, Tyron Woodley boxing Jake Paul 2 different times. I feel like Tyron Woodley is kind of the laughing stock. Nobody even talks about Tyron Woodley as like a welterweight GOAT in the UFC anymore, because now whenever you think of Tyron Woodley, you think of Tyron Woodley getting KO'd by Jake Paul, out cold, on the mat, out for several minutes. And yeah, man, it's unfortunate because Tyron Woodley was a dominant welterweight champion with 4 title defenses, and now he's known as the UFC champion, washed UFC champion that got knocked out by Jake Paul. And yeah, I think washed up UFC fighters choosing to box Jake Paul. I understand the money is enticing, but man, if you have any dignity or self-respect for your legacy, don't do it. It just tarnishes the UFC. It tarnishes your legacy. And yeah, I think all these UFC fighters, Anderson Silva, Nate Diaz, Ben Askren, as well as Jake Paul, as well as who was the other one? Tyron Woodley, all boxing Jake Paul. It came back to bite them, and it ruined their public image, in my opinion. Now, whenever you think of Ben Askren, you think of, oh, got knocked out by Jorge Masvidal and knocked out by Jake Paul. You think of Tyron Woodley, oh, he got KO'd by Jake Paul, and it's like, it's not a good look. It's embarrassing. But yes, in my opinion, these are the top 10 fighters who made the worst career decisions and ultimately led to their downfall one way and another. Let me know in the comments what some other terrible decisions made by fighters. And if you enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Thank you guys.